Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Excuse me. All right, folks, ready for the next one? First of all, thank you for sticking it out to the end of the day. I know that sometimes, especially after lunch, food coma settles in. We get a little tired, but what I wanted to share with you today is a combination of enterprise and consulting experience. I've worked in shops where it's been my job to deploy and manage identity and access management programs. I've also worked in consulting shops, helping companies figure out what security looks like or should look like based on their budget, their team, their risk appetite. I'm real big on risk. And so this is actually part 2 of a series of talks I've been putting together. If you're a prequel fan, that's all right, we can still be friends. But hacking identity is a talk that I shared in a few conferences and meetings last year, where I talked about pen testing, taking some of my own experience and leaning on people who are a lot better at it than I will ever be, and pointing out that when it comes to compromising organizations, when it comes to this, like, why do we do what we do? How are the criminals actually taking advantage of weaknesses? I was focusing on identity and access management weaknesses and application security weaknesses. This talk is, okay, we get it. We know that this is important. What do we do about it? So I want to focus on strategy today and give you some pointers for how to start making these changes in your environment. I'm still very much a how-to guy. And then coming soon, or eventually, I want to do a very tactical talk that's more tools-centric about, okay, now that we've got our strategy and we've got our plan, what's step 1, what's step 2, and I want to dig deeper. But today we're on the path to maturity. Anybody seen the Marathon Man flick back in the day? Yes. You know the scene then, right? There's one scene in that movie that makes me as uncomfortable as I think a movie has ever made me. And I'm a cinephile, folks. I've seen a lot of movies. It's the "Is it safe?" scene. In this scene, Dustin Hoffman's character is being tortured by someone who's after him for some information. And the torturer, his instrument of choice is a dentist drill. I don't like going to the dentist in the first place, but he just keeps asking over and over and over, is it safe? And Hoffman has no idea what he's talking about, so he doesn't know how to answer it, and the scene gets very uncomfortable from there. This is kind of how I equate my life of trying to answer the question, are we secure? Always made me uncomfortable. I didn't quite know exactly how to answer it. But it's the difference between compliance and security, right? We've heard this drum beat over and over and over. Being compliant isn't the same as being secure. And we've seen, if we go to privacyrights.org and look at all the data breaches that have been publicly disclosed over the past 10, 15 years, we see that there are a lot of compliant organizations who have been breached and compromised. And the checkbox approach, I've never been a fan of. I fought it when I was managing security. I recommended it against it as a consultant. I'm actually a fan of taking a maturity model approach, looking at it from the point of view of the people who are in the leadership of the company. F5 published a report in December of 2017. I've got the link here, and I know the presentations. I don't know if this is on my slide share, but I'll put it up if it's not, or the organizers can get it to you. Download this report and give it a once-over, because this is actual data. This isn't hyperbole. Now, granted, F5 is a vendor, right? Every vendor, knowing that I work for a vendor, every vendor has their area of focus, their drivers. But the data that they pulled out of here, the statistics they pull out, are still useful and relevant. They found that in looking at hundreds of data breaches over the course of this 10-year period, that the initial attack vector, again and again and again, was either an identity and access management weakness or an application security weakness. So what this tells me, if I'm working as a defender, if I can get IAM right and if I can get AppSec right, I'm going to be doing a pretty good job of reducing the number of attacks that actually give me a headache, right? That actually require some sort of response, because I'm able to shut them down before the attacker actually does damage. As I said, compliance is not security. Maturity is a much better approach. And this is what I'll be talking to, but let me dive right into it. When I talk about identity and access management, I don't like to assume that everybody understands the acronyms or has used them in their day job. In IT and security, we are huge fans of acronyms. We don't have time for the entire word. So I wanted to just touch on some fundamentals quickly before I go into the maturity model approach. Identity and access management is actually two separate disciplines that for some reason we've squished into one. Identity management is being able to tell who somebody is, right? If Runa logs in to an application, do I really know that it's her, right? And if I know that it's her, I have a decision to make as the application owner, as a system owner. What am I going to allow her to do once she logs in? What am I going to allow somebody to do is where we get into access management. And when we squish them together, we tend to lose sight of that. And what I wanted to just point out, 4 key areas that apply to that flow of I'm going to create an identity, and in my environment, I'm going to have all these things that I eventually want to grant that identity access to. Those things are called entitlements. Now that thing might be, I'm going to let them use root on all my Linux boxes. Or that thing might be, I'm going to make them an approver in PeopleSoft Finance. Or that thing might be, I'm going to put a smartphone in their hands. Right? It can be logical, it can be physical, but all these different things are entitlements. When we use the word provisioning, we're talking about giving these things to people, right? I'm going to provision you access, an identity, and then access to that identity for all the things you need to do. Hopefully, by the time you show up on Monday to do your job, you get moved to a different department. I'm going to provision you access that everybody in that department needs in order to do their jobs. And then I've got to make a decision about what do I deprovision from your old job. Because you work at a company for 5, 10, 15 years, you don't need access to everything that was provisioned to you early on. So provisioning and deprovisioning are the 2 aspects of granting and taking away. And then the attributes are usually, if I look in an environment, it's the flag, right, or the indicator of how I know who should have access to what. Traditional IAM lifecycle starts when the relationship begins with an organization. It's very important if you're looking at identity and access management that you are not just looking at when somebody is hired, because you have entire populations of users who are never hired at your organization. You don't hire a vendor. You don't hire a volunteer. You hire employees, and yeah, you kind of hire contractors and consultants, but do you really? The term hire I tend to stay away from, understanding that I've got to be able to differentiate among these different populations so that I can figure out what I want to do with them once I create their identity. The authentication, authorization piece is I'm going to give them the ability to log in, and then I'm going to give them access to all the specific things. Eventually, organizations go down the path of self-service, where they say, I'm tired of calling the help desk over and over and over because I can't remember my password. I'm just going to let them reset their own passwords. I'm going to let them manage some of their own attributes. And then ultimately, I've got somebody coming around at the end saying, you said you were going to do it this way. Did you really do it? Those are our internal auditors, third parties who are looking at our controls to make sure we're doing everything the way we said we were. And then at some point, the relationship is going to end with the organization. Again, for employees, this is pretty simple. But in the university space, what do I do with somebody who is no longer a student? Well, now they're alumni, right? Or they're something else. What do I do if I have someone who goes on maternity or paternity leave? I might want to deprovision certain things while they're out. They go on sabbatical, and then I can provision them again when they come back. I pulled this out of a Kuppinger-Cole white paper. Again, if you do IAM, I've got a Kuppinger Cole paper, and I think I referenced my E&Y white paper in here. There's some really good resources that take all this stuff and kind of simplify it. A thing that I bump into, again, working for a technology vendor, I hear the term governance applied to a technology, and governance it's people, process, technology. It's not just a technology solution. But when we're talking about governing our identity and access management, right, that's one of the first things you have to do when you're going down this path of maturity, is you have to figure out, what am I responsible for? When I'm talking about identity and access management, am I just talking about Active Directory? Am I talking about federated authentication to all these third-party software as a service applications? Am I talking about my privileged accounts? Am I talking about two-factor authentication? There are all these bits and pieces that are within that realm, and that's one of the first things you have to do, is you have to figure out, what am I even looking at? What's in scope? So enough of the basics. Now I want to dive into maturity models. This is straight from Wikipedia, and it's the DoD Carnegie Mellon maturity model approach. When we talk about maturity, we're taking that concept of compliance and giving it depth. We're giving it meaning and value. If a PCI auditor comes into a retail shop and says, are you doing what Control 12.3.1 says you should be doing? They're looking for a yes-no answer. Now, fortunately, I think they're getting a little better about pushing, but everything pivots off of that. You're either doing it or you're not, and then we're going to go into detail. Maturity is where you take that yes-no answer and say, but I want to understand both how well we're doing it, and I want to understand how well we want to be doing it. So my favorite, right, initial, individual heroics. If you have something you're doing within that IAM governance sphere, that scope, where you've got one person at your organization who does it, and if that one person is ever out, it just doesn't get done, that is the lowest maturity level score that you could apply to a control. As an example, in my consulting days, I would help organizations trying to do self-assessments for different compliance certifications. Someone brought us in to do a PCI self-assessment engagement, where we went through the entire PCI data security standard and helped them figure out what they were doing and how they would answer these questions to third parties and auditors. I got to the access management controls and was asking questions about, how do you set up a new hire? How do you handle terminations, right? All the provisioning, deprovisioning, onboarding, offboarding. And they said, oh, that's this person over here. I said, well, can we go to his desk? I wanted to ask him the questions directly. We went to his desk. He wasn't there. So my contact asked somebody else on his team, where is so-and-so? Oh, he's out this week on vacation. I'm like, oh, that's fine. Can I talk to his backup? Well, he doesn't have a backup. I'm like, so he's the only person who knows how to handle terminations? Yeah, really. So what happens if somebody gets pissed off this week and storms out, and then you've got an unfriendly termination where they might be more inclined to do something bad with access that they shouldn't have? And the answer was, we got to wait for him to get back. It's a very uncomfortable conversation, but it's not unrealistic. And that was just one control of many. When we get into two, repeatable, this is where we actually start writing things down, or taking a minute to watch over somebody's shoulder and say, this is how that person does the thing. When somebody signs on and we need to create an account in Active Directory, we need to create an email account, we need to set them up for some website. Who does that? How do they do it, right? Writing that stuff down is kind of the step one for making something repeatable. And if you've got it documented, then you don't have a single point of failure. Then you can take that documentation, put it in front of somebody else, and they can do the thing even if the one person who's an expert at it is unavailable. When we get into defined, now we're saying it's a standard business process. Not only have we written it down, but this is the way we do it all the time, every time. This is where shell scripts come into play, right? If I know I'm always going to set somebody up and put them in these groups, I'm always going to give them this mailbox and they're going to be a member of these groups, then I can PowerShell that, right? I can have some rock simple automation But when you've got something that's got that level of automation, which usually involves some sort of technology, you score it as defined. And if you want to score something as capable, you're able to measure it. I can sit down and say, password resets. How many help desk calls are acceptable on a monthly basis for password resets? And as we ask that question, we're able to come up with an answer that leadership cares about. I'm spending this much per password reset. That's too much. I want to spend less. So we'll measure this month, and I want to figure out if we can put something in place that's going to bring that number down. So the last one, the 5, is one that I don't see that often. Oh, did I turn off here? Let me try that. Sorry, fellas. All right, now I'm on.
We're still getting a recording.
All right.
What are you trying to do?
Yeah, it's...
That one's dead. That one's probably dead.
Yeah, let me try another one real quick.
Holding the mic should probably work still.
I'll just start pulling stuff out of here and see what...
Holding the mic probably works.
Which one's that?
That's one built into the podium.
Oh, that means I got to stand still? Wait, can you hear me?
It was up underneath speakers will be changed.
All right. How about I'll use this one. Sorry about that, folks. When it comes to a 5, a lot of organizations look at that and say that's way too much. I don't need to do that. I don't need that level of perfection. It's where everything is so tightly integrated that it's fully transparent, right? It doesn't even show up on someone's radar. It's tough for me to find because I don't bump into that a lot in the field. A lot of organizations are in that 2 to 3 range, and they really want to bleed 3 to 4. Sometimes people want to get up to a 5, but that's not your call, right? That's leadership's call. And when I say leadership, I'm talking leadership of the business. I'm talking the people who are determining how much money they're going to spend on everything in terms of staff, in terms of technology, and not just IT. I'm talking to do everything they're trying to do. They're the ones who make the call with where you want to be in the maturity model. But being able to apply the maturity model now gives you more real answers. It gives you information that you can actually use. If you're saying that we're at a 3, but the CIO wants us to be at a 4, now you can go back and say, well, we need a way to measure that. What do you want to measure? What makes sense? What would make a difference here? E&Y and Gartner both have information. If you dig into maturity models, I'm sure you'll find more than just these two. I start with these two to give you an idea that you can go even deeper into explanations of what a maturity model means at your organization. You can't just say we're repeatable, we're defined. You can't just say 1, 2, 3. You have to be able to back that up. You have to be able to explain it to people outside of your group, outside of your team. You can use some of the language they've already published out here. Here's the E&Y white paper I mentioned earlier that I swear by. It is the best white paper I've seen on IAM so far. The Gartner piece is actually from one of their analyst SlideShare account. It's weird because Gartner stuff isn't free, so I thought it was odd that he put that out there on his personal account and not a company account, but that's between him and Gartner. I'm just here to tell you that if you want more details, you could get it there. So how do you get from where you are today to having a defined maturity-based approach to improving your IAM controls? I want to take that kind of step by step. Let's do it one at a time. So if you were to assume, right, today, if you've not gone through the process, then you really can't say, well, Jerod, we're at a 5, we're at a 3. You could assume that you're doing the bare minimum. Now, I know that that's not the case. Any organization that's had IT in place for any period of time has done some automation and some implemented some controls to put you at a 1. But the first thing I would recommend you do is actually do some sort of self-assessment. When I talk about a self-assessment, I will look at ISO 27002, and I'll look at NIST 853, The NIST 853 is FSMA. The ISO 27002 is all the specific controls that are part of that 27,000 based security program. And just go through all those controls and pull out the ones that have anything to do with identity management and access management. At that point, you have a list of questions that you could ask throughout the organization. Are we doing X? And as you look at the score, there's going to be yes, we're doing it, but how well are we doing it? And that's where you pull out the maturity model and say, well, here's how we would score it on this 5-point scale. You tell me, IT administrators, system administrators, directory administrators, is it a 2, is it a 3? Let them score, have a conversation about it. When you're done, that spreadsheet or that document or whatever you're using is your maturity assessment, right? Now you've got information that you can use in every conversation you have with everybody in the organization around what identity and access management means to you. Take that into some leadership something, whether it's a security steering committee, risk steering committee, whatever groups are getting together to talk about why you're doing security at your organization, how much you're going to spend on it, what goals you're going to accomplish this year, whatever that group is, share this self-assessment with them and say, hey, we've got some more data for you. We've got some more information about identity and access management. And oh, by the way, we read in this F5 report about why this is a big deal. And you can start to help them understand things that they may not have articulated yet. They may know they need to improve security, but when it comes down to improving IAM, they may have no idea. And here you are walking in with answers. You're saying, look, we've got a picture of what we look like. As you go through all of the things that you've identified, if you look at all the controls where you've not written down how you do it, just have somebody write it down. We don't tend to like to write things down. I know that finding technical writers who enjoy being technical writers is challenging, but they're out there. I've worked with them. I had someone I worked with at AEP when the NERC SIP standards dropped. Her entire job was writing policies, procedures, and standards, and she loved it, and she was really good at it. Find those people, let them write down how to do these things, and then you can start cross-training. When I was at Abercrombie, we had, at our peak, a 4-person security team. And we had 12 security technologies that we were responsible for managing. And one of those technologies was our IAM environment, which was something like 50 or 60 servers with multiple applications like automated provisioning and single sign-on for our employees, single sign-on for our vendors, multi-factor. All of that was one thing. If I was ever going to get a vacation, because I was one of the 2 guys who was on call when that stuff broke, I had to train the rest of my team on how to do it. If I was going to train them on how to do it, I had to write it down. If you go through that process of do the assessment, figure out what procedures you need to write down, and then start training people, you're already bringing your maturity score up to the next tier. When you want to get to that repeatable, if your goal is to have 2s across the board, right? You want everything to be a repeatable process. You've got to have that documentation. Eventually, you're going to want to take it to the next level. Well, the very first thing you need to do is make sure your documentation set is complete. It's not just the procedures of how you do what you're doing, but it's policy, procedure, and standard in the relationship among the 3. The policy is all about quality and what you're going to try to tackle. The standards are getting into some of the specifics of whether it's platforms or versions that you're going to align with, and what the controls are going to look like in those different environments. And then the policy procedure piece is where you write down the step 1, step 2, step 3. Take time to get that documentation set complete, and then take inventory of everything that you want to start managing. If you don't already have some sort of asset inventory in place on your network, then chances are you've got bigger issues. Because if you don't know what's connected to your network, you've got all these entry points where nasty stuff can start to either come in or they become data exfiltration points. Take inventory of everything you're trying to manage around identity. And when it comes to IAM, beyond systems and regular user accounts, you want to figure out privileged accounts, service accounts, right? Where do I have all these accounts that an app developer set up 10 years ago to do something in one database? And the other piece that we have been deliberately kind of ostrich head in the sand about is you have to own your software as a service applications when it comes to IAM. You can't just say, oh, I told somebody on that team when they signed up for that app that they're responsible for identity and access management. And it's entirely disconnected from all the things we're doing in-house. I just trust that that end user is going to apply the same level of security and same due diligence that I'm doing internally, even though they're not a security person, they're a business person. And they only told me yes so that I would go away. Take a look at all of your remote applications, your software as a service apps, and get a feel for the user populations in there. If possible, begin simplifying and consolidating. If you find that you have multiple directories in the environment, can you start pointing things back to OpenLDAP? Can you point back to AD? Is there a better way, instead of having an application with a set of users in a database, can you push some of that toward a central directory? I'm a big fan of centralization, and that really, I know that there are options there. It's not a matter of getting everything down to one directory. It's, in my opinion, the fewest directories possible. And then look for ways to begin federating all those, the cloud remote stuff. Don't settle for soft documentation controls if you can put a technical control in place that gives you and your team the ability to manage it. And then start looking at automation. And I say start looking at, you might start to introduce some of the shell scripts or some of the technology that's going to give you a little more consistency in how you do what you do and give your folks some of their time back. If you have controls that are a 3 and leadership wants you to bump those up to a 4, again, 4 is all about measuring metrics. Looking your provisioning and deprovisioning and aligning it with your business processes. I was just talking to a friend of mine. We used to work together in consulting. He's here today in another talk, and I'm not bitter, Dan. But he said it, what do you call it? User abrasion? I'd never heard this term before, but I'm going to use it every chance I get. Pissing off your end users. Don't do it. Find a way to implement your security controls in a way that still lets them do the job that they were hired to do. Let them come in and be the people that they want to be at work, but give them the guardrails, give them the security to reduce the likelihood that they're going to do something bad, either accidentally, thank you, or intentionally. What this means when we look at provisioning and deprovisioning, and this is very hard for me, and I'm assuming it's hard for some of you as well, we have to get out from behind our desk and talk to people. I don't like getting out from behind my desk when I'm in a corporate environment. I love hoodies and headphones and just leave me alone all day to do the thing. But when it comes to identity and access management, you've got to get out and sit down and say, show me how you do your job. Let me see what you do when you're logging into websites. Let me get a feel for where I'm frustrating you by putting these controls in place, right? That's what you want to start doing here if you want to get it to that next tier, because it helps you get not only to a 4, but even if you want to pursue the top tier, the 5. Look at integration between identity and access management and incident response. Lenny Zeltzer, I talk about this in my hacking identity talk. He's got a series of cheat sheets on his website, zeltzer.com, Zeltser. One of his sites is an incident response checklist that if you're doing incident response for a potential data breach, what are all the logs that you're supposed to look at? Don't wait for a breach to sit down and look at this checklist. Sit down and look at it today and say, if I have a breach at some point down the line, am I going to have all the logs I need when I really need to bust this checklist out? What you'll find when you look at his cheat sheet is it's all about successful log on, failed log on, privilege use. You need to be watching what people are doing with their identity. And this isn't necessarily an IAM control. This is more log management and security information event management. And whoever your incident response manager is, you want to talk to them about what you're doing with IAM so that you can start to find the overlap between the two and bring those two together. You want to make sure you're producing and generating the logs that that person needs in order to detect when something bad happens. Take a look at privilege management and take a look at remote. I use the acronym CRUD. I hate it, but I've learned focusing on identity that it's very popular. Create, read, update, delete. It's just like 4 basic things you do with an identity. But you want to take a look at how your privileged users are doing what they do. You want to take a look at how your remote users are doing what they do and see if there are ways you can start actively either managing or measuring that activity. And then finally, metrics. You can start to talk about metrics here, because if you've got everything written down, right, we've got repeatable processes, we've got some shell scripts in place and some technology supporting this automation. Now we can focus on getting to a point that the numbers we're capturing make a difference to people. If you want to go from a 4 to a 5, I'll talk about that in a minute, but at this point, a lot of people hit 4 and they're like, I'm right where I want to be, right? If I can measure things that are going to make a difference to the business, anything else is just icing on the cake and I don't need to go above and beyond. That's really up to your leadership. You can show them your maturity self-assessment where you've got 4s down the line, and if they say, why aren't we 5? You say, because I need 3 more people on staff and another $10 million in budget for all the technology that's going to automate this. You tell me, leader, if you want to make that investment, I will not say no to your money. That's as somebody who had more fights about budget than I care to remember. But looking at metrics that matter is tricky, and I don't have as many resources on this as I wish I did. I can see clear value in metrics like how long does it take somebody from the day they show up to when they have access to everything they need. That is that should be a gimme metric for anybody doing maturity, and it should be 0. That's our goal there. I don't think that's unreasonable. Password resets, tickets around password resets would be the big one. Tickets around inability to log in, because of either, what do I want to say, like password disparity, where you got different passwords on all the different systems and people are like, well, I tried 3 different passwords to get into that app, and I can't remember what the Oracle password is because I only use it in Oracle, and it's not the same as my Active Directory password. Look for tickets around people who can't log in. Look for tickets around people using two-factor, and ask yourself if the way you've implemented two-factor makes sense for your user population. Incident response metrics, incidents where you can point back to something where, whether it's somebody fell for a phishing attack, an attacker got into our office or exchange environment, and then rerouted requests to wire money from one account to another. Incidents where attackers get into self-service portals and redirect people's direct deposits so that when tax time rolls around, that tax refund goes into the attacker's account and not the employee's account. If you're actually tracking metrics around that stuff matters, right? The number of times people reset their passwords, when I told them to reset their password, I mean, there's going to be some garbage metrics that might make you feel good, but they don't actually make a difference to the business. Have a conversation with leadership about what really matters to them in this context, and you'll come up with the right numbers. But then, as you start to improve, you're eventually going to get to that point where, yay, everything's doing what we need it to do. This is actually a really good place to be. And your entire identity and access management program doesn't need to be 5, but you may find that you have specific things that you're already doing well, and you want to mature that to a point that it hits that efficiency, that it is absolutely transparent. I do want people to show up on day one and be able to do their jobs. I've talked to people where I said, so how many days does it take from the time somebody shows up on a Monday to when they can actually get to everything they're supposed to get to when they can actually do what you are paying them to do? And they laugh and they say, what do you mean days? We're working in weeks here. That's unnecessary. And you may choose to take some controls in that space and say, we want to make him 5. So which ones do you want to focus on first at your organization? I'm going to turn back to that E&Y white paper. They took a look at the organizations that they were working with and putting this paper together, and they found the organizations who were most driven by risk reduction and compared them to organizations most driven by business value. I've worked in public utilities. Public utilities, risk reduction. We're not quite sure how to make a new electricity, right? Electricity is electricity. So since we're not making a new product, we want to make sure that we're focusing instead on keeping criminals out of our nuclear power plants, or making sure that our substations are all delivering electricity to people in the middle of windstorms and blizzards and times where our more vulnerable citizens might be at risk of physical harm if they're without power for multiple days, right? Potential loss of life. Organizations focused on risk reduction care more about things like privilege, multi-factor, role-based access control, analytics. If you're in an organization like that and you go talking to your leadership about what identity things you should focus on first in improving your maturity score, that's the stuff that E&Y has found will resonate with that audience. But if your organization is focused on business value, again, retail, we just sell t-shirts and we want to sell more t-shirts than our competitor. Well, then you want to have conversations with them about things like single sign-on and self-service and federation, because that's the stuff that's going to make the employees more efficient. They can sell more stuff faster. It's not about risk reduction as much as it is about making them more effective and more efficient. But this gray area here is the stuff that both sides of that spectrum agree on, right? Figuring out your asset inventory, figuring out an authoritative identity source, putting some governance stuff in place. Keep this in the back of your mind as you go through this maturity process, and you'll be better at managing conversations with the people who are going to approve the changes that you recommend, or who are going to approve budget when you're asking for more staff or asking for a new technology. And the other thing that I would share is there's a conversation to be had about point solutions and platforms. And you really need to understand, and this has always been hard for me, budget and long-term management of technologies if you're going to make a good call, or the right call. I don't even know how to word that. Point solutions tend to be really good at going deep, at having more advanced features. Platforms tend to be kind of a higher level, but it's much more broad. And so they might be able to do more. I know I would tell you if they hadn't already packed up, but if you were to walk down the hall of the vendors sponsoring here today, there were multiple IAM vendors here today. And when you talk to them about what they do, looking back at that governance model, they'll do either one thing really well, or they might do 2 or 3 things pretty well. And it's really up to you and your leadership to figure out what makes sense at your organization. I can't answer that one for you, but I did want to give you just a few things to think about when you're going down that path. Because eventually as you're talking to peers and you're talking to people about, we want to improve this control, we want to make this change, technology is going to come up again and again. So just go in with that mindset. So what could you do, not tomorrow, because I hope you're not working tomorrow. If you are, sorry. But maybe next week, if you wanted to get this ball rolling, if you wanted to start a conversation internally about improving identity and access management, I would start asking questions about, do we have a strategy in place when it comes to IAM? And go ahead and make your CIO uncomfortable and say, what's our 3-year plan for identity here? What's our plan for customer identity management, for vendor identity management? Have that conversation about strategy first and see if they've already got something written down somewhere that you can use as your starting point. That'll help you not only move more quickly, but you're already on the same path that they started down. Do you have support for your initiative? Executive support. I'm a grassroots kind of guy. Every job I've been in, including the one I'm in now, I do stuff because I think it's right. And then I try to show the people who make decisions about should we do this on a broader scale. I say, look, I've got limited success here. Can we expand it? You do at some point, though, need to go into that executive conversation and say, I need your help, right? I need people. I need budget. I need time. You'll have things you need, and you'll have executives who have authority in moving things around. You want somebody to own identity at the organization if they don't already. If you've got a security steering committee, just make sure it's a topic that they're talking about, because that's how you can start the maturity discussion. Ask them to rate these in order of most important to least important. Is it most important that we start with governance and getting our arms around all the identity things? Are we getting pushback from users, pitchforks and torches about how complicated we've made it? I was, the company I'm with, we were at a customer and they were talking about their access request form. And they said, yeah, there was a company-wide survey, every employee, of the 3 things that they wish we would improve about the company. And this could be anything to like parking sucks or we never have fresh coffee. And they said, our identity and access request form is one of the 3 most hated things in the company. And I felt their pain because I worked at shops where that's true. But their leadership might be more interested in, we just want our users to be happy. We want people to like working here. And that's not a security question, folks. That's a cultural question. But that's where you might look at identity is how you prioritize the things that come out of your maturity assessment. And then if cost is the driving force behind all the leadership decisions, right? We got to cut X, or we're going into these markets and we got to free up money so that we can put stuff here. Then they'll want to have conversations around how identity and access management governance, how improving your maturity score will actually help their cost scores. I found in conversations I've had with different execs that if you put these 3 questions in front of them, they'll have an answer like right away. Before you even finish asking the question, they'll be like, no, the most important thing is X. If you know what's important to them, then you can drive the conversation from that point to say, this is how we're going to approach maturity here. These are the things we need to focus on. And then take a minute to figure out all the as-a-service usage in your environment, because we are far past the days where we could turn a blind eye to it and say, we're just going to let them set up their own AWS buckets, and we're going to let them auto-provision anything they need in Azure because we're not ready to manage it internally. No, you absolutely have to be talking to them about that. You don't have to be actively managing it. You don't have to automate it all today. But at a bare minimum, you need to know what's out there and see the conversations need to happen. I've worked almost 20 years in the technology field. So I tend to go to the ones and zeros first for my solution. It's a habit that I've been fighting to break, and I'm still fighting to break it. Fall back on that people, process, technology triangle when you're talking about making changes, because you have to look at all 3. It's not just go buy a tool and the tool fixes everything. You have to start talking to people. You have to find the people who are going to have your back internally. You have to find the people who are really frustrated with the way certain identity and access management things are happening, and have them be your advocates outside of your group. And then you want to engage that leadership. And if this isn't you, right? If you're like me, if you're more comfortable being on the introvert side, find somebody at your organization who is good with that extrovert, engage, uncomfortable conversation piece. make them the ones in charge of the people piece of IAM. On the process side, again, write this stuff down, sit down with people to learn like who's doing the provisioning and who's being provisioned to, and just get a feel for how this impacts different teams, different individuals, not just the people who are getting accounts and access, but the people on the help desk, the people who are administering Active Directory, the people who are provisioning to the cloud apps. Get a feel for what their day-to-day looks like, because eventually you're going to find patterns where you're like, well, if I build this shell script, I can do this, this, and this, and that helps all these people. Now you've got allies, going back to the people thing. One thing that I really dig that I'm seeing in the identity space is the work that the Identity Defined Security Alliance is doing. Has anybody here heard of them? I didn't think so, because, we have one. Very nice, John. Very nice. They're not a big organization yet. Julie Talbot Hubbard used to work here in Columbus, is actually one of their board advisors now. And just this week, they scored 501(c) status. So they're officially a not-for-profit organization. The IDS Alliance was a joint venture between Optiv and Ping Identity to say, we got to figure out this whole identity thing from a technology standpoint. So those two organizations came together and started brainstorming ways to educate people about IAM. And eventually the other vendors who all do identity and access management started jumping on board. And I think there are something like 20, 25 vendors who are a part of this alliance, which is why, and this is my one caveat, it's very technology centric right now. I'm hoping with the 501(c) status, and I'm actually trying to get more involved. The company I'm with is a member, so I've got an opportunity to actually engage these people directly. I want to help kind of guide the direction they take this framework. But they've got some core IAM, like they call them best practices, that would be a great starting point for your self-assessment. If you're not sure what questions to ask, just go to the IDS Alliance website and pull down their list of best practices. Use those handful of questions for your maturity assessment. They've also got something called use cases where they talk about how to, like, if you want to do this, if you want to solve this business challenge, then here's the technical thing you're looking for. And that's what maps back to the framework, the model that they have right there. I'm not telling you to swear by it. I'm not telling you to go change everything you're doing to make sure you align with the framework. But it is critically important that if you have identity and access management as part of your job responsibility, know that there are a lot of really smart people behind the scenes who will put this stuff together and are continuing to make it better. And if you're in now, you can actually influence the direction they go through the community. When it comes to the technology part of that people process technology triangle, there's a lot of value in improving maturity here. Resources, again, at the end of the day, I like to put links out here. I've got links to the stuff that I talked about. And I've got ways to get a hold of me. I'm not difficult to find online, but I got to do my standard warning. There are two Jerod Brennans. They're both me. It's like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. There's a Jerod Brennan that does security and InfoSec and teaching, and then there's a Jerod that does filmmaking and writing and comic books. If you like both, then hey, we should have a whiskey sometime. But this is how to get a hold of InfoSec, Jerod, if you want to hit me up. That's all I had for today, and I'm actually just a few minutes past. We're at 4:20, and I know we got the keynote coming up next. Do you have any questions before I shut things down? Cool. Well, folks, like I said, hit me up if you have questions about this. I see a lot of value in going down this path, and I think if you try some of these internally, you might get some of that